The horrifying memories of the NASA Columbia space disaster of 2003 will always be remembered. It's a reminder of the dangers astronauts face, and it has left a lasting mark on the history of space travel. On board of NASA's Columbia Space Shuttle that day, 7 of NASA's finest astronauts died. Nobody was expecting such a tragedy. After all, the flight which took place on the 1st of February 2003 was simply a routine flight. In fact, this was the 28th flight of the space mission Columbia program and was just a simple expedition. However, when the Space Shuttle attempted to re-enter the orbit of planet Earth, those at the Space Center soon became aware that something terrible was going on.
Definitely don't want to be outside now. Like we did before.
Because when Charlie Hobaugh attempted to communicate with the Space Shuttle through the capsule communicator Capcom,
and Columbia, Houston, we see your tire pressure messages and we did not copy your last.
Instrumentation, Max.
the line suddenly went quiet after a loud pop interrupted his communication with Commander Rick Husband. It was only after several minutes of relentlessly trying to reconnect with the NASA Columbia spaceship without getting any response that Charlie Hobaugh and the rest of the team at the Kennedy Space Center became aware of what was going on, because that was when they were prompted to switch on the news. At that moment, their deepest fears, that nobody wanted to say out loud, were confirmed, and learned that the spaceship carrying the 7 of NASA's finest astronauts crew members had exploded while trying to re-enter Earth, while looking at the falling leftovers coming down from the air being broadcasted on live TV.
38 miles above ground, the space shuttle had exploded.
Simply put, the entire planet looked up to see that the spaceship had exploded and splintered into several pieces as it plummeted towards the ground, like a comet breaking into the Earth's orbit. Soon, the pieces and debris from the spaceship were scattered all over Texas. Following this, President George Bush announced the true depth of the tragedy to the world as he let us know that, unsurprisingly, there were no survivors.
My fellow Americans, this day has brought terrible news and great sadness to our country. The Columbia is lost. There are no survivors.
Following this, we were left to mourn the loss of Commander Rick Husband, an experienced astronaut and fighter that had spent time with the U.S. Air Force and the Royal Air Force in the UK before joining NASA. Pilot William C. McCool, the Navy officer and aviator who completed over 2,800 hours flight experience in 24 aircraft and over 400 carrier arrestments before even joining NASA in 1986. Mission specialists Michael P. Anderson, the lieutenant colonel and astronaut who served as payload commander in charge of science experiments on the Columbia. David M. Brown, the U.S. Navy captain who was there to support the payload mission, only to meet his end on his first ever space mission. Laurel Clark, the NASA astronaut, who was also a medical doctor, United States Navy captain, and Space Shuttle mission specialist, who was on the spaceship to take in the 24-hour groundbreaking experiments which took place on Columbia. Ilan Ramon, the first Israeli pilot ever, and finally Kalpana Chawla, a young woman who defied the odds to become the pride of India. Although everybody was hoping for a safe return from the 2-week trip into space, they'd have to do with the memory of the heroic astronaut and her colleagues as they died doing what they loved. Long before she became the pride of India, Kalpana Chawla found herself in conditions that would ordinarily make it impossible to even imagine herself on a spaceship.
For me, it was very far-fetched to think I'd get to fly on the space shuttle.
However, the little girl born on the 17th of March 1962 would soon reveal that she wasn't one to surrender to the weight of challenges, especially when they came in between her and her dreams. Born as the youngest child to conservative parents, Banarasi Lal Chawla and Sanjyoti Chawla in Karnal, India, the little girl wasn't even formally named when she attended school for the first time, as she always went by her nickname, Montu. However, this didn't last for long because she needed a formal name to start schooling, so she gave herself the name Kalpana, which, if you could believe it, is Sanskrit for imagination. As playful as such a name might sound, nobody could actually imagine what she was going to go on to achieve.
Simply do not have time to delve on yesterdays because you have to finish the whole mission properly.
Apparently, many also couldn't believe what a determined little girl they had before them. Even her siblings would tell you that she wouldn't take no for an answer, especially when it came to showing boys that she was just as good as them, if not better. She wasn't just another girl. As loaded as such a statement may be, we need to remember that back in the 60s, girls in many societies were not considered to be as capable as the boys. Heck, in some places, they weren't even allowed to attend or complete their schooling. As such, you can imagine how alarmed Kalpana's parents must have been when they realized that their youngest child showed an interest in space and aircrafts. A girl with such interests was almost unheard of. This love for everything aviation began when she laid her eyes on a flying airplane, and before long, her father couldn't stop her from visiting the local flying club with him. Unsurprisingly, the little girl grew up hoping to pursue a career in something within the engineering field. Despite the resistance of her parents and her teachers in her school, who believed that the world of science and engineering was no place for a woman, Kalpana shrugged the doubters off by enrolling in the Punjab Engineering College when she graduated from Tagore Bal Nikitan Senior Secondary School. After finishing a Bachelor of Science degree in Aeronautical Engineering, Kalpana decided to chase her master's, so she headed to the United States of America to embark on the next stage of her college career. Despite the disapproval of her father, the then 22-year-old enrolled in the University of Texas at Arlington in 1984. Imagine, this small-town girl actually pulled it off, and by 1988, the 26-year-old bagged a PhD in aerospace engineering from the University of Colorado. Soon afterwards, the young woman began working at NASA's Ames Research Center, where she specialized in fluid dynamics aircrafts. Following this, she progressed by getting her hands on as many piloting licenses as possible. This gave her the ability to fly airplanes, gliders, and seaplanes. As time went on, Kalpana soon became an American citizen, and even better, she was elected by NASA to be one of the 20 out of 4,000 applicants that would be taking astronaut training. Looks like her dreams were actually coming true. Things seemed to have gone well because within 3 years of training, Kalpana embarked on her first trip to space in 1997. This was the Columbia program flight STS-87. It proved to be one heck of a trip because she orbited the Earth about 252 times while she was out there for 2 weeks. Turns out this was part of the Space Transporting System, which was the 4th space program that had human space flights in it. Running from 1981 up until 2011, the Space Transportation System was the longest human spaceflight program in human history, and this was probably because the program focused on the reusability of their spacecraft. As such, the 2 main ships that were used in the program were Space Shuttle Challenger and the Space Shuttle Columbia. Sure, there were others like the Discovery, the Atlantis, and the Endeavour, but we know that the Challenger and the Columbia were pretty frequent visitors to outer space. In fact, before the tragic disaster, the Columbia had been used to explore outer space 27 times ever since its first launch in 1981. Upon hearing this, we're sure it begs the question, if the spacecraft was so safe and reliable, what happened on that fateful day in 2003? What happened to its reusability? How could such an accident occur if the spacecraft went through thorough inspection, repair, and refurbishment after every trip into outer space? Before we answer the questions, we must remember that Kalpana's first flight into outer space on the STS-87 was also significant because it was a landmark moment of sorts. Integral to the trip, she was the mission specialist who was the main operator of the robotic arm of the flight. This meant that she'd be the one to deploy the Spartan satellite. This was a satellite that would be sent out to the sun so that it could orbit the outer layer of the yellow star. Although there was a minor hiccup when the satellite spiraled out of control, she was able to retrieve it. This proved to earn the respect of those at NASA and the astrological community. This eventful trip into outer space was also important because this made Kalpana the first Indian woman who traveled to outer space. As you can imagine, it caught the attention of those back home. Even the Prime Minister of India at the time, Inder Kumar Gujral, gave her a call to congratulate her for her achievements.
Yes, Mr. Gujral, I hear you loud and clear. How do you read me?
Kalpana, we are proud of you. Each one of us in India is proud of us. Proud of a person like you who has done such a pioneering work.
Now recognized as the pride of India, Kalpana tells us about how she felt when she first made it into space. probably feeling small and humbled by what she witnessed. She said, "When you look at the stars and the galaxy, you feel that you are not from any particular piece of land, but from the solar system." Apart from controlling the robotic arm, Kalpana also spent those 2 weeks in space taking part in experiments such as observing how plant reproduction may work in the microgravity conditions of outer space. Similar experiments would take place during her second trip out there, and as such, few would have thought much about Kalpana's last trip into outer space in the early days of 2003. Originally planned for 2001, the trip was delayed 13 times until it was scheduled to launch on the 16th of January, 2003. Together, the 7-man crew went into space to conduct a series of non-stop experiments, which meant that someone must be awake throughout the trip. After spending 16 days performing about 80 or more experiments that had the potential of curing or at least aiding with prostate cancer, the team turned their attention towards returning home. Unfortunately, they couldn't have known that it was never going to happen, at least not alive. So, what could have caused the explosion that destroyed the ship? Could it have been caused by the careless actions of the pilot? Was it one of the crew members who did something reckless or negligent? As much as we hate to point fingers at any members of the crew, it may provide some relief that none of the crew members were at fault. It turns out that none of them even had a clue about what was going on until a few minutes into the tragedy, as they could be heard laughing and joking around before they got some troubling signs that things weren't going as planned. Within a minute of the Columbia losing its connection with the Earth, the spacecraft's backup flight software informed the team that 4 of the wheels on the left side of the Columbia had lost pressure. Annoyingly, some at NASA had known that this could have been a possibility on the day the spaceship was launched into space. Apparently, a small piece of foam had separated from the Columbia and had collided with the spacecraft's left wing. Perhaps more damning to this tale, this foam was connected to the spacecraft's external tank to the main shuttle. Now you may ask how such a small piece of foam may do so much damage, but when you hear that it crashed into this left wing at speeds of up to 900 kilometers per hour, I'm sure you can see how this could have created a problem for everybody on the ship. A few days after this happened, NASA called on SDS Program Manager Ron D. Dittemore to take a look at the damage that may have been caused with the use of their satellites. Incredibly, Dittemore refused. As you can imagine, he must have felt culpable after the tragedy because he resigned afterwards. Following this, a commission called the Columbia Accident Investigation Board was put together so that they could carry out an investigation on the event. In August of 2003, the commission came up with a report which pointed to NASA's negligence as they failed to use their spy satellites to analyze the damage on the ship. As a result, they allowed the crew to ride to their doom. Everything came to an end when a hurling piece of foam caused a hole in the left wing that continued to grow as the spacecraft approached the Earth. This caused air to leak and damaged the ship's thermal protection system. As the hole grew bigger, a piece of insulation that was as big as a small fridge broke off the ship. It caused the exposure of a large part of the Columbia to external fire and gases, a terrible and explosive combination. After losing control of the sensors, access to the temperature readings were cut off. Before the blink of an eye, the spaceship began to fall apart as it hurled back to Earth. As the world mourned the fallen astronauts, we must point out that the 2003 report also stated that foam strikes do occur frequently. However, it still doesn't mean that this couldn't happen again if the piece hit the wrong place at the wrong time, just as it did with Columbia. 5 years later, another report was released in 2008. It may provide some relief to some to learn that the astronauts did not suffer because they passed away within seconds of the explosion. However, they would have heard the warning sirens and alerts that must have sounded off within a few seconds of the disaster. They would also have realized that even if they had a more protective cabin, chances were they would not have been able to survive the exposure to the hypersonic entry conditions that they experienced while trying to return home. Following the tragedy, NASA put a halt to its space shuttle program for about 2.5 years. During this time, they spent the resources needed to redesign the foam ramp so that such an accident would never occur again. Thankfully, This must have worked because we haven't experienced a similar incident since then, even up until the point when the space program came to an end in 2011, after completing 135 missions in 30 years. Amazing, isn't it? Although 14 astronauts lost their lives during this time, we will remember them just like we do Kalpana Chawla. The young woman's life was one of such determination and achievement that even back home where girls were not necessarily given priority, now they know they do have a chance in succeeding in the world of science. Maybe one day, they too could even have a comet named after them in their memory, like the 5/1826 Kalpana Chawla.